the road. Felt sin's breakers dash, trying to conquer my soul. Heard the voice of Jesus telling me to still fight on. Promise never to leave me, never will he leave me alone.
He'll never leave me.
No, he won't.
The Lord will never leave me alone.
I was sick in my body and couldn't help myself. Went to my family and my friends, I couldn't find no help. You've been my peace in the midst of the storm, been my guiding light. When trouble was all around me, Lord, you made everything all right. I thought I had it all together, I thought I had it under control, but then I felt so all alone. Nobody cared for my soul. You said can't nobody care for you. You said you'd always be there, even when my burdens got heavy. You came and answered my prayer. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, we won't. No. Never leave alone. Said he never leave you all alone. Through sickness and through pain, in sunshine, even in the rain. No, no, no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Never will he leave. When I'm all alone, my pillow wet with tears, he was standing by me. Yes, he will. No, 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 no. When you're burning down, he will be right there. I said he never will he leave you, never forsake you, stand by you. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because you are my present help. Never will he leave me, never forsake me. Be right there to the end of the world. I said never, no, never, never in the midnight hour. He will give you power to make it. You can go through the trials and pressure. Pressure is on. God will be there. Yes, he will. Hey, hey, hey. Never leave. Hallelujah. All right.
Dr. Stewart and Pastor Moore, we are here to interview you both. The Preachers Network 901 has chosen to take this month to honor both of you who were the first African-American female pastors here in the city of Memphis. What an honor to have you both here. I wish it was a big old crowd here that could give you a hand clap of praise, but I'll do it in the meantime and stand in for everyone who I know is cheering and watching at this time. Just to get everything started, we will have some questions here that I'll ask the both of you as we have the conversation and as we talk and unpack these things. I think we'll be able to know if both of you will answer or if one of you would like to choose which one you would like to answer. I kind of like to flow that way versus just being strict in that order. But I'm looking forward to a great time. Do you have anything that you would like to say before we get started?
I would like to say that I don't sit in a place of having been one of the first or second pastor of a church in Memphis as a female. I am the second. Pastor Stewart is the first female elected to a traditional Black Baptist church in Shelby County. There, of course, were female pastors, or like Dr. Shirley Prince and Betty Austin, people like that. So I wanted to make that distinction and correction before, because I don't want people to take that away and say, oh, they claim they're the first women. We don't want that to happen. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, and
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think the point is that we were two of the first two pastor Baptist churches. So there were other women before us. As she said, Betty Austin was an AME pastor. Shirley Prince was a staff pastor at Mississippi Boulevard. But as it relates to our denomination, I was first, and Pastor Moore, I think, was elected like 3 years after I was, I believe. That's if I'm not correct, if I'm not mistaken. But in terms of lineage, in our tradition, we are the first two.
Correct.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that clarity. Thank you. So I guess with that, in that vein, can you all tell us, for those who may be watching who do not know, go ahead and introduce yourselves. I know the both of you. So I guess we'll start with Dr. Stewart. If you can tell us who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you pastor, what do you do?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me say thank you, Reverend Kenya, for hosting this interview. And let me express my appreciation to Dr. Kevin Patterson and the Preachers Network for taking the time to honor us. It's always a blessing when people take the time out to acknowledge your contribution and acknowledge your work. So I want to say that. And it's always good to share space and platforms with my friend and colleague, Reverend Mary Moore. I am the pastor. I'm Reverend Gina Stewart, Dr. Gina Stewart. I pastor Christ Missionary Baptist Church in Memphis. I've been the pastor there since March 4th, 1995. I was elected by majority vote on March 4th, 1995. And this past March marked 26 years. The distinction about not only was my election historic in the sense that I was one of the first women elected to serve an established Baptist, Black Baptist congregation, but it is the church where I also grew up. It's the church where basically I have gone all my life. My mother took me there when I was 7 years old, and I've never left, gone anywhere else. And so shortly after my pastor died in May of 1994, had a massive heart attack in Bunton's restaurant. Some people may remember Bunton's. It was a major eatery here in the city, over on Southern Avenue. Shortly after he died, our church was, in searching for a pastor. And of course, I did not expect that they would consider a woman, but they did. And as I stated earlier, on March 4th, I was elected and have been there ever since. And it's been a good journey. God has blessed me with some wonderful people and people who were fully persuaded. The majority of them were fully persuaded that this was the Lord's will and that it was the Lord's doing. And so it's been a great journey these 26 years.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Pastor Moore.
Yes, thank you. I too am grateful for this privilege, for this honor. One, of course, that I certainly was not expecting, but we do appreciate Dr. Kevin Patterson and the Preachers Network. I love Dr. Gina Stewart. She's just been there. She's been there. And I'm telling you, when I heard, and I'm going to talk about me in a minute, but when I heard that she was being considered pastor of Christ Missionary, I started praying. I prayed every day until they elected her. I was so glad, not because I was seeking anything like that. I wasn't bothered about being a pastor. In fact, I did not even submit a resume to be a pastor. I was trying to help the folk at New Salem on South 4th Street find a pastor. I was serving as the pulpit manager, not even the interim pastor at the time. And Pastor Charles J. Patterson Sr. was the interim after the church split, or after another pastor had left. At any rate, so I was there to help. And in attempting to help the church move forward with a pastor, I was in one of our final meetings, and I presented the persons that we were going to consider from the search committee. And one of the members was just, beside herself. She said, well, she's been carrying on all this time and she's been doing it. Why don't she want us? And I'm like, I didn't say I didn't want you, but the Lord has not led me to submit a resume for this position. So at any rate, we want you. And I really had to allow the next person in line to continue to chair the meeting. I said, well, I tell you what, if this is what the church wants to do and you feel the Lord is leading you to do that, then I will step back and I'll let you all do what you feel led to do. And I said, anyway, I left the meeting. And when it came time to vote, it was on a Sunday. I was at the church and I went home. And I was having dinner. And my sister called and she said, well, we got a pastor. I said, oh, Lord, good. Who? She said, you. I could not eat another bite. It unnerved me. I was scared. I was feeling inadequate. I was just messed up right there. But I'm so thankful again that Pastor Stewart had already gotten in there 3 years ahead of me. And she was always available to me to answer any questions that I had and so forth. At any rate, I stayed there for 13 years and I asked the Lord for leave at that time. I turned 60 and I felt like and this is Mary Moore, felt like I had taken the church as far as I could with the help of the Holy Spirit. At any rate, the Lord did give me clearance and clarity, so I wasn't messed up about it. The people didn't want me to leave. A lot of, the way we act, crying and all of that, but it was time. And I felt like somebody with a younger spirit could come and help promote or move the church to where it should be. At any rate, it was fine. It was good. I love the people, still love them today. I've been back there several times and it's all been well. Well, no, don't let me say it's all been well. It hadn't all been well. But for me in the congregation, we made it through some tough times and the Lord did bless. I'll say it that way.
That's a perfect segue into, I guess, the first question or the first statement. Can you all tell us what was your experience like? Or what has your experience been like, Dr. Stewart, as the pastor of Christ Missionary, and Pastor Moore? What was your experience like? What were some challenges that you have faced, or just some moments that you would like to share with us today?
So you're asking what were the challenges? Is that what you're asking? Or you just want a generic answer to what it's been like? Or
what has it been like overall? Yes, ma'am. A little bit of both, but really primarily, what has it been like overall?
Okay. Ironically, the journey has been good overall. There are always challenges. I say this to people all the time because people have a tendency to think that being a woman in leadership carries and it does carry a unique set of challenges because we know that sexism and gender bias is real. But leadership in and of itself is challenging, whether you're male or female. So I won't say that there were not challenges or that there have not been challenges throughout the pastorate as it relates to just, the occupational hazards, I call them, of ministry. But in general, it has been a good journey. And I think one of the reasons why the journey has been good is because I pastor my home church. People ask me all the time, what is it like to pastor your home church? And I say, it can be a blessing and a curse. Because people trust you because they know you. But then there were people that didn't initially trust me because they knew me. And some of them had their own apprehensions because not only was I female, but I was also 35 years old. And so while men often are called to churches in their 20s, 35 at that time for some people seemed a bit young to be assuming the leadership of a church, even though I came into the pastorate with prior administrative skills because I had worked as a director of admissions for a computer school and for Shelby State Community College, which is now Southwest Technical Community College. So I had 10 to 11 years of administrative experience, not necessarily in a church, but I had skills that were transferable to the pastorate. But there were people who, I'm sure had their apprehensions. They were not extremely vocal about it. But, I do know that there were some people who would have preferred a male or just would have preferred somebody else. But what I have to say for them is that by and large, they did not make the journey difficult. The greater challenge was not internally, but it was external. It was external because, we are part of a denominational tradition that believes that God doesn't call women. And there are some that believe that while God will call a woman to preach, God doesn't call a woman to pastor, which is asinine, if you ask me, because if God calls you to preach, you just might end up getting called a pastor. And so one of the greater challenges for me has been the noise and the chatter that my members encountered externally. Y'all going to hell because you got that woman over there. And, the Bible said that woman ought not lead men. And the Bible said that women ought to keep silent. And, the battles, the verbal battles, I don't think they ever really came to blows with people, but my members have had some serious verbal battles with people that still view those problematic passages of scripture as validation for why a woman should not lead a church. Even when they were talking about it, I was still in seminary. I was in my last semester of seminary when the church was getting ready to elect a pastor. And there was this buzz, all over the city. Everybody was talking, and the seminary was they were excited. They were rooting for me. But at the same time, there were people saying, if y'all elect that woman, they're going to put you out the convention. If y'all elect that woman, won't be any men at the church. If y'all elect that woman, the church is going to split. All of these threatening kinds of messages or threatening narratives were in the air, designed, I believe, in some ways to deter the members from taking such a courageous move. But because I had a pastor who was pioneering in a lot of ways and visionary in a lot of ways, and he had already begun to lay a foundation in terms of what egalitarian ministry looks like and that God is not a respecter of person, the members were able to transcend those narratives and vote based on who they felt God was calling. Now, it probably helped that they had voting machines because they did have voting machines. They had voting machines and they had a CPA to tally the results. It was just that historic because they wanted to make sure that there would be no question about who the real winner was or who the person was that was elected to the congregation.
No recall.
No recall, baby.
Wow.
So I would also add as an addendum to that is that for me, in addition to just the challenges of being a woman in ministry, is the issue of power as it relates to leadership, power issues and sexism, issues of authority and sexism were probably two of the greatest challenges that I faced initially coming into the pastorate as a woman, and also as a woman that people knew when she had pigtails. So there were people who didn't want to let me grow up. They wanted me to be little Gina. But little Gina was 35 years old, not 13. But it's hard when people have known you as a child all your life, it's hard for them to make that transition initially. But over time, you know, we got through it. And I would say that pastoral care is one of the ways that I believe, one of the disciplines that I believe has led to that transformation that has happened over the years.
Yeah, wow.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Look, as I stated, I was not looking for this to happen. However, it did, and I received it well. I was still working and in corporate America, and I decided after 6 months, I was elected December 7, 97. And in 6 months, I said, I can't do both. The kind of job that I had. People were dying every week. And I was not going to be let off to go preach a funeral every week or every few days. I mean, it was just rampant. And I inherited an older congregation because there was a split, and many of the young adults went with the split. So they were dying out, and I was wondering, Lord, is anybody going to be left here for me to even claim to be the pastor? and it worked. I mean, you know, it kind of slacked up, but I quit my job of 28 years. I just went to my managers and said, this is my last day. They looked at me like I was a lunatic, but I knew I was taking this step of faith because I needed to, and I needed to be full-time. It was a huge, huge cut in my salary, of course, because the church started me off with $400 a week. And that's what it was. So I had to sustain. However, my husband and I had been married for 1 year. And of course, he thought, what kind of crazy woman have I married? She's going to quit her job in a year. And we just got this house. We just, you know, but anyway, he didn't act up. And I spoke with him to say, you know what, this is going to be all right. The Lord's got this. And he was okay. So at any rate, when I went to the church to tell them that I was leaving my job, I got some pushback because, well, we had said that whatever pastor we get was going to have to stay on the job 2 years before I said, well, all right, it's done. Now I'm not on the job anymore. So we're going to have to increase my pay. I was able to speak some things, but there were some things that wouldn't fly with them because they were so steeped in what tradition and you know, the ways that they had been accustomed to running the church. Talking about the officers of the church, they led, they did everything. They told the pastor what to do. And so that was one of my biggest challenges, my biggest challenge was to help them understand I did not accept this charge to come in and preach and teach Bible study. That is not what I was called to do. I said, now we have to decide who's going to be the pastor. We had those kinds of conversations. And they went back and, well, I didn't say I want to be the pastor. Well, your actions. And it was not always acrimonious, I should say, because the people genuinely showed me love when I was elected. All the office, they were just excited, but they didn't know it would turn out. They didn't know that I was not the yes person. See, I had been there for a number of years. I think I joined that church when I was 33. And by the time they elected me, I was 47. So I was not a kid. And they had to understand that as well. I had to. And so I was not the yes person that they thought I would have been because I did have a mild manner. I didn't do a lot of confrontations and what have you. But that you know, I knew what my role was, and I knew the stances that I had to take. So I didn't back away from them, and you know, having to talk to the Lord about a whole lot of things, and and Dr. Gina Stewart about a whole lot of things. And she told me some of the things that she did. I'm like, I can't do that. But anyway, I can't do that over here. That's not going to work. At any rate, it didn't prove to be a real hurdle. It just didn't work well for me and my personality and for what I knew that I needed to do. And the church itself, herself, would back me if we were talking on the phone or away from certain leaders. But when we would come to a meeting, they would clam up. So that was not ever helpful for me. And I'd stand as a lone wolf, but and make my charge or speak whatever needed to be spoken. But the people seem to have had a fear of bucking what they had always known as authority there, face to face. So anyway, we got through that, but I had so many male pastors that embraced me, embraced my charge, would not allow people to say things to them about me or Gina for that matter. I mean, they would call our name. No, y'all not going to talk about Pastor Moore, Gina, and Dr. Stewart. Y'all not going to do that. Reverend Stewart at the time. And so that helped a lot, and it helped strengthen the bond between me and the church, because I would invite these persons in to preach and for different opportunities to teach and what have you. So they had to learn that it was okay for me to be the female pastor that they asked for and the female pastor that had the authority to say certain things and to do certain things. They had to learn that through somebody else. It's just like a child being told by their parent certain things, but they don't hear it until the next door neighbor or somebody down the street tells them the same thing. And then it makes more sense to them. So, we had to go through that. But overall, it worked well until I decided that it was time for me to take lead.
Thank you.
Sure.
You. So we've talked about some of the challenges and things that we faced. What have been some of those highlights of your journey as pastoring? Pastor Moore, you're an interim pastor now at Olivet Fellowship Baptist Church. So you are still in the game. I know you said you ended it where you were initially the pastor, but you're still in the business. So what have been some of your highlights in your journey?
Well, I'll still go back to New Salem. Let me go back there and talk about the highlights there. And I know I talked about some of the things that were a little negative, but experiencing how God works and worked through me in ways that cause naysayers and critics to humbly submit to God and to bow to his will. And that was a highlight. And I'll give you one case in point. When the Reverend Charles J. Patterson Jr. passed, he was pastor of Mount Zion on the Parkway. Well, Charles Patterson Jr. was a huge force and name in the National Baptist Congress, well known, noted, loved. He was a member of the the Baptist Ministerial Association Alliance, whatever. Yeah. And he had been a long time pastor of Mount Zion on Parkway. However, everybody was wondering when he died, man, who's gonna do the funeral? Who's gonna preach the eulogy? Charles Patterson grew up in New Salem, and his father was the pastor there for a while, and he was interim until he died, and then they elected me. At any rate, Charles never did move his membership from New Salem. So we would always say he was my pastor and I was his pastor. like he needed me. But at any rate, that's, theoretically. So he had made it clear, he had put it in writing that he wanted me to eulogize him. And I didn't know it until after he had passed. And his family told me, people were calling, wanting to know, the folk from the ministerial thing were calling, wanting to know who was going to do it, because many of them, of course, I would imagine, desired to do it. And then they got word that I was going to be the eulogist. And they came in great numbers. And it seems that they all had a reserved area where they all sat together and what have you. So when let me back up here just a little bit. I'll digress. When I was told that I had to do the eulogy, of course, I was a little nervous about it, but I prayed, and this is the first and only time this has happened to me. When I started preparing the sermon, I sat down and I manuscript the sermon, the eulogy. And it seems that it took me about 20 minutes. That has never happened to me in my life. Never happened since, either before nor since. Not for something that way, like that. And I got up and I left it and I went shopping. I didn't think about it. I didn't agonize. I was at peace. And when I came back, I didn't look at it. At any rate, when I got up to do the eulogy, one of the pastors said, "You better preach. I want you to preach." I said, "I want you to stop lying." And I did. I said that to the person. But I went on. This was not out in the open where everybody could hear it. But at any rate, I did the sermon, the eulogy. And in the midst of it, the group were just sitting there, many of them. And then they started rising one by one by one. And later, after everything was over, I started getting calls after calls after calls from some of them, even some from out of state who did not believe in women preaching. And then I got calls from people that I knew well, and they said, one of them had spoken to them and said, "Man, we tried to sit there. We just couldn't sit there." They just started popping up. "We had to get that woman was blah, blah, blah." Well, I didn't, I heard them. And my point is just to see God work the way he did from my preparation through the eulogizing was something that I shall never forget. It blessed me. It helped me. It let me know that God was truly with me. He manifested. He showed himself strong. And that bolstered me. That helped me to just continue to go forward and not be concerned about antagonists, to just stand still and stand firm and allow the Lord to work the way the Lord desires to work. And if we do that, it'll work out just fine. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you, Pastor Moore.
Sure.
That was awesome. Wish I could have been in the room or been there to see it. Pastor Patterson was my mom's pastor, my grandmother's pastor. So, yeah, I wish I could have been in the room to see that and witness that.
Bless you, darling. Bless.
Yeah, I remember
Dr. Stewart
Patterson too. I remember at your installation, Pastor Moore, Reverend Patterson making a statement where he called the deacons and the trustees together. I don't know if you remember this. And he said, "I had a little meeting with the trustees and the deacons, and I said, I'm not going to have to come back over here and have any meetings."
I do remember his saying that.
His advocacy for you was very clear and unequivocal. I mean, he was very, very direct about his support, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
Male allyship is so important to what we do as women. And it does cost something. I know that's not the question, but just to sort of piggyback off of what Reverend Moore has said, male allyship is so critical because men have privilege, just like white privilege, there's male privilege. And male privilege is deeply embedded in our churches, in our congregations. And it takes courageous men like Dr. Charles Patterson and like my pastor, Reverend Curry, who were willing to stand up for us and they did not stand up without paying a price.
Right.
I remember when my pastor initially not ordained me, when he initially licensed me to preach, there were many pastors in this city that really came after him. In fact, he told the story the week after he licensed me about some of the pastors and preachers accosting him at Four-Way Grill after that Sunday. And they were like, Curry, what you doing? Licensing that woman to preach. You gonna open up a can of worms. All these women gonna be wanting to preach. And one pastor, who I'll leave nameless, I know who he is, but I'll leave him nameless. He's deceased now. He told Reverend Curry, he said, well, I hope they invited to come preach at my church, because if they invited to come preach at my church, I'm going to make a stand on the floor. So he said, Reverend Curry said, and I hope that you invite her to preach too, because the Sunday you invite her to preach at your church, that's the Sunday she'll preach at Christ Missionary. So, so he was very adamant about his support. And, you know, if male allyship is so critical, I think about Dr. Ed Parker, like Reverend Mary Moore said, there were a number of men in this city who embraced both of us. I have an image in my head, even as we're having this conversation, of a row of guys that was sitting on the front row at my installation. Ed Parker, David Boyle, who's now gone home to be with the Lord, and some others who were grinning like I was their little sister at my installation. And, you know, I mean, they were really excited about what God was doing. And they didn't, you know, there are some people, Bishop Jake said, I need people to be my friend when I'm not in the room, you know, because it's one thing for you to advocate for me when you're in front of me. But when you're in the room and I'm not there, I need you to be my friend then. And there are some like Ed Parker and David Boyle that I know for certain. And now Keith Norman, even your pastor, my friend, our friend, you know, I know for sure that when I'm not in the room, I don't have to worry about somebody saying something about me as a person or pastor, and that it's going to be met with silence. Because so often when we're in the room, when we're not in the room, that's when it really matters, when we need people to speak up for us. So you didn't ask me all of that, but when Pastor Moore was talking about Pastor Patterson, I just thought about this notion of male allyship and how that's going to be important to moving the needle for women in ministry. That as the brothers really do stand up and advocate for us publicly, and it's never without a price. It's not without ostracism. It's not without rejection. You know, there have been some that have, I remember when Dr. Gino Gibson told me when he moved to Memphis, he told them when they invited him to be a part of the Memphis Baptist Ministerial Alliance, he said, he asked them, is Gino a member? And they said, women are not allowed. He said, well, I'm not going to give you all my money. You know, I remember when Reverend Kenneth Whalum asked for his money back from the Baptist Ministerial Alliance, because to this day, they still don't accept women. Not that we care, but it is just an example of how sexism in the 21st century still persists. And that if women are going to, if the needle is going to be moved for women, certainly it's moved when things happen, like when people like myself and Pastor Moore get elected to churches and women are elevated to positions of authority. But it happens then, but it certainly will move a lot quicker when we have male allyship like Reverend Patterson and Reverend Curry advocating for us. But that wasn't the question you asked us. You asked the question, what were some of my some of my happiest moments? And you know, I have a number of happy moments. So I'll just share a couple that really come to mind, 2 or 3 that come to mind. And one of them is, one of the things that makes me happy is being able to implement some of the things that I know my pastor would have liked to have done had he been living. Pastor Shirley Prince, one of my mentors, often says that vision outlives the visionary. So if vision is really vision, it's going to live beyond your lifetime. But because I grew up in that church, because I worked closely with Reverend Curry, I knew that there were dreams that were in his heart that he didn't get to see realized while he was living. And so every time we are able to accomplish something or do something that I know would have been something he would have implemented had he had more time or support or even finances, that gives me great joy to know that his legacy is being continued. The other thing that gives me joy is bringing joy to people. I mean, I love to see my members smile. I like making them happy. I like it when they are excited when I can do something for them. You know, whenever we have big events, they say, Pastor, don't you want to eat? I say, I'm too excited, because I'm just so excited because the people are excited. So I get excited because they get excited. You know what I'm saying? I get great joy in seeing them smile, in bringing joy to their lives, in doing things that will help to enhance their lives. I remember when we went to South Africa, back in 2017 for the church's 50th anniversary. I wanted to expose our members to that because I had that experience. Mary and I traveled together. Pastor Moore and I traveled together for 6 years. Was it 6 years, Mary? I think it was 6 years, or was it 3? It may have been 3. I was a team leader, so I traveled on 2 immersions, but we traveled together for Lot Carey. We were a part of the Pastoral Excellence Program, and we got to see South Africa. We went to Jamaica, and we went to Guyana. And when we went to South Africa, I just felt at home. There's something about stepping onto the continent of Africa that you just know you're at home. And I asked the Lord then, I said, Lord, one day I want to bring my members to South Africa. And finally, in 2017, when we celebrated our 50th year church anniversary, we went to South Africa, and I was so excited. I smiled so much, I should have gotten lockjaw. I was so, just to see the excitement and to have the exposure. I believe that one of the greatest gifts you can give to people you love is exposure. And that's one of the things that I've tried to do for our congregation, is to expose them to excellence, expose them to the best in preaching, expose them to experiences that will expand and broaden their vision and broaden their horizon. But I tell you, going to Africa, I still, even when I see pictures pop up on my screensaver, and it's been 4 years, I still grin when I see those pictures, because it was an amazing experience. We called it a cultural and missional immersion. And so not only did we go as a trip for pleasure, but we also got to do some very significant ministry. And we really, I hope that we'll be able to go again when we hit 55. Hopefully the pandemic will be over. Next year is our 55th year of existence. The Lord say the same. Hopefully we'll get a chance to do another international experience. And then the final thing I would say, there are so many things that have been wonderful moments when we moved into our building. I mean, you know, trying to build a building was a major, major undertaking. And of course, you know, there was opposition, and there were setbacks. You know, we struggled to get financing initially, but God miraculously worked that out. And, you know, just having a dream, and where the building now sits, the new building now sits, there used to be an old building on that land. And nothing was on that property but grass, glass, and trash. It was just a dilapidated building. It belonged to us, but and my pastor had gotten it for like $1 or something from the city, but it had no real presence for the community. And to dream about something else going there, to have actually dreamt about something that is actually manifested tangibly and physically, was probably one of my happiest moments in the pastorate, because, the enemy. And I'm not talking about people enemy. I'm talking about spiritual warfare. The enemy did everything he could to try to keep that from happening, but the Lord blessed, and we finally moved in that building. And by the grace of God, we are still there. And I would say one of the other things that brings me joy is when members get it. One of the things we spend a lot of time as pastors, and you probably know this too, Reverend Kenya, because you're a staff pastor and you served in a leadership role. We spend an inordinate amount of time trying to put together vision and programs and ministry opportunities, because we take this assignment seriously, and we know that transformation is a part of the goal for people's lives. That's a part of the goal that God has for us. But sometimes the results are slow. You spend a lot of time sowing, but you don't always see the harvest. You reap in a different season than you sow. And sometimes you ask yourself, is my living in vain? Do they really get it? But every now and then, God will let you have those moments where they really get it. They really get it. And it's in those brief moments that God sends those almost like a breath of fresh air to give you a fresh wind, to let you know that what you're doing, you're on the right track. What you're doing, your labor and your living is not in vain. They listen, they get it, but you may not see it in your lifetime. It's almost like Jesus, with the disciples, most of the time they didn't get it. But after the crucifixion, when you read the book of Acts on the other side of the Gospels, Peter and James and John and all of those apostles were some powerful men of God. And they had spent all their time with Jesus. Now, when they were with Jesus, they were like, can you explain what you just said? Can you explain this parable to us? But when Jesus ascended and they were left to carry out the greater works did they do, even greater than Jesus did. So those are just some of the highlights. I mean, I got a lot of stories, like 26 years. I got a lot of stories I can tell, but it's not just my interview. I'm not the only one on this interview.
Yeah. No, you're fine. Pastor Stewart, you said you kind of touched the topic that I kind of want to go back to. You said you were talking about how even today, still in the 21st century, there are women still are not embraced, and there's still patriarchy and sexism that we encounter. The question is, why is that still the case? We have examples such as you and Pastor Moore and so many others that proves that God does call women to pastor and preach. So it's not a lack of knowledge at this point. So what is it, and why do we still have that to be a case? And both of you can answer that if you like.
Well, I would say that it persists because we have yet to address how deeply embedded sexism, misogyny, and patriarchy is embedded in church and society, church culture and society. And when we talk about sexism, misogyny, and patriarchy, we're not talking about people, we're talking about systems and structures. And the thing that it parallels is racism. I mean, if you want to really say, why does it persist? It is because of these notions of inferiority that are built on a fallacy and to some extent a construct that is built on a hierarchy that assigns a lower value to certain people as opposed to others. So as it relates to race, there is a hierarchy of value that is assigned to Black folk that says that somehow we're inferior, even though we are the ones that we can do just about anything that white folk can do. There's just something about the myth of supremacy that suggests that somehow we are inferior. The same thing is true with sexism, and it's deeply embedded. It's deeply embedded in culture, in society, and in the church, and in church history. If you go back and read the patristic fathers, some of the things that the way they felt about women, that a woman, I believe it was Augustine who said that a woman was a misbegotten man, and Tertullian and some of the church fathers who basically blame Eve for all of the troubles that assail humanity. And Augustine, who is revered, but who did not really have a high opinion of women. Women have had to navigate layers of sexism and patriarchy and misogyny. And the truth of the matter is, it's probably a blessing that we didn't know it when we were called, because anybody with any sense would not even want to be up to this. I mean, you have to be called to this, because nobody in their right mind wants to sign up to be mistreated, or to be rejected, or to be hated and disliked because of the bodysuit that we're in. And so it persists because we have a system and a structure that needs to be dismantled. And it is difficult to dismantle it. It's because the system benefits people that are in it. And not all of them are men. There are women that benefit from sexism. There are women that benefit from patriarchy. There are women that benefit from misogyny. So it is far more complicated than just the fact that two women got called to a church. Because I will tell you this, even after women pastor successfully, a congregation will still go back and say, well, that was a good ride, but we still want a man. I know a woman pastor who pastored successfully. And when she left, her congregation said, you did a great job, but we think we're ready for a man now. So
some of it, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, and that is why I was making the statement about male allyship, because it cannot be dismantled by women alone. It's just like Matt King Carter said once, racism ain't black folks' problem, it's white folks' problem. Because when white folks start speaking up and saying, this is wrong, this is ungodly, this is evil, this is inhumane, et cetera, then you're going to see it perpetuated to some degree, because it has a self-perpetuating kind of system and structure that has to be dismantled. And we can't do it alone. We can do it to some degree, but we can't do it alone. We need allies, just like black folk need allies from white folk.
Absolutely.
We need white folk to preach about racism in their pulpits.
Did you hear that Beth Moore stepped away from the Southern Baptist? Yeah, right. I applaud her.
Yeah. But even in a case like with Beth Moore stepped away, but they are still unwilling to do the necessary critique.
Absolutely.
That says we need to do something about this. I mean, let's face it, the Southern Baptists just apologized for racism not too long ago.
Halfway.
So anyway, go ahead, Pastor Moore, because that's my soapbox right there. I'll take a sip of water.
You're doing so well. But many years ago, when I was in a discussion of sort about why men, black and brown men, even don't accept us, we discussed that it kind of started during and after slavery. Whereas our men were so oppressed and beat down and broke down until when women started coming forth, they like, I'll be darned. If I'm going to let a woman, after all I've gone through in my life with these other folk, and then a woman's going to come and take my spot now. So, and I won't go into a long diatribe about that, but that's part of it. And I think another thing is many, even the younger men, preachers today, some, not all, some. I think they were so and are so loyal to their forebears that they would dare ask the Lord, what did you have to say about this woman preaching, pastoring thing? I don't think they will even search the scriptures any further than what they were given by their mentors, their pastors of the past, those who would say, I can't preach in their pulpit. Gina can't preach in the pulpit to come here. And I had one to say after I was elected at New Salem, when you all get a pastor, then I'll come back and do revival again for you. You know, that kind of.
That is pitiful.
But at any rate, I think they're stuck, some of them, on 1 Timothy 2:12, and that 1 Corinthians, whatever number, 14:34. They're stuck there because this is what has been ingrained in their psyche, in their hearts, in their spirits. They just cannot move beyond that because this is what my pastor taught me, and this is what I'm going to stick with. And it just sounds right because the Lord said the man is the head of the woman, and God is the head of man, and you know, all of that. So they're not willing to remove the blinders, to search the scripture to see what the Lord is saying to them, even for this time. And that young folk, that's what's baffling to me. I mean, we're in a different time and an era, but they're still holding on to what their forebears taught them.
And if I could add to that, will you finish, Pastor Moore?
Yes, go ahead.
If I could add to what Pastor Moore is saying, yes, I agree that biblical literalism is definitely a foe as it relates to women in ministry, because people will isolate these texts and use these texts to endorse the subordination and subjugation of women, and as validation, really, for why women should not preach, why they should not teach, why they should not pastor. And not only that, but also tradition. You know, there are some people that, just because that's the way it's always been, they're not willing to contest what has been the practice. Because of course, when you contest that, there's always a risk when you attempt to implement or bring about or introduce new paradigms. So in addition to sexism, I would agree with Pastor Moore that biblical literalism, which is a result of not necessarily being either not having the skills in biblical criticism or ignoring it. And tradition, yes.
When I first started pastoring in New Salem, I received a call. Gina, you might remember Ray Howell on WLOK.
Yeah, I remember Ray.
She called me for an interview. And so I went, and I expected the two of us would just dialogue. But she opened that phone line up, and the callers were, you know what happened, girl? They started calling and attempting to bash me and that kind of thing. How you know the devil didn't call you? How do you know? And you just in it for the money. I told you I was making $400 a week putting money. But at any rate, how you know the devil didn't call you? And so I said to her, and you said it too, Gina, Dr. Stewart, I would not, and I don't know anybody in their right minds that would subject themselves to this kind of stuff that you all are calling in saying to me, for what? I mean, I'm in my right mind, and if this is what I have to deal with, why would I do this to myself? I mean, that's real crazy. So I told them, I said, just watch. Just continue to watch, and you'll see what the Lord is doing. I don't have to argue with that. And in the meantime, Apostle Alton Williams was trying to call in. He was trying his best, and he never could get through. So he called me at church. He said, I was trying so hard to call in and as an ally to tell them exactly how. He said, but girl, you didn't need any help. You would let them have it. I'm like, you know, we can't just sit back and accept anything that people say. I mean, we're just not going to do that. We have a right to, but we don't need, as women, and that might be one of your questions, as female pastors, we never need to attempt to defend our calling. That is not necessary to try to prove what God has already approved. I mean, he's already done it. So why we got to argue with folks? If the Lord can call a donkey, I hate that. I despise when women compare themselves to a donkey, or to that scripture that you're talking about. And he can make a donkey talk. He can make me sit down.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know that you've been called and you can preach without all that, then maybe you need to go back and ask the Savior to help.
So in that vein, what advice would you all have for young women in ministry today?
The first thing I would say is get a mentor. And even if, and I know that can be difficult because there are not many women that are far enough ahead of us. When I came along, there weren't many women in ministry, but books were my mentors. I was mentored by people at a distance before I met them up close. So ideally, getting a mentor it's easier said than done, but there needs to be somebody in your life, in the words of Dr. Frank Anthony Thomas, who can say cease and desist. And there needs to be someone in our life who's further along than we are, who can kind of help show us where the landmines are and speak some of those things, like this conversation we're having with you right now. There are just so many things that we can share with you that you may not necessarily have the opportunity to share in the context of male-female relationships. Guys sort of automatically just kind of end up being taken under somebody's wing, but women, that doesn't always happen for women. And as a female who travels a lot, one of the things that I'm always encountering is, will you be my mentor? Will you be my mentor? Well, realistically speaking, I can't really mentor a person in the way that people see mentoring, but I do make myself available because I believe that is a part of my stewardship of other young women, that because God has been kind and God has blessed me to be in this role and in this position all these years, I feel that is a part of my stewardship for as far as ministry is concerned, to try to help some of the younger sisters, not only in terms of mentoring, but to support you and encourage you and to try to help open doors for you, because it's not really a compliment if we get a door open and then we shut it behind us. Right. We try to open doors for you as well. We want our ceiling to be your floor. So I would say one of the things is to get a mentor. I do advocate education because I believe that a trained clergy is a necessity in these times. But I say that with a caveat because I understand that theological education is expensive. And so I say if a person can't spend the $30,000 to go to seminary, get some type of continuing education, go to conferences, learn as much as you can, because the pew is no longer an illiterate pew. The pew is literate. And the pew has access to Google and to social media and to all of these other platforms. And so standing behind a sacred desk, when we talk about just preaching in general, standing behind a sacred desk is an awesome task and an awesome responsibility. And we owe it to God first, but also to the people that will give us a hearing to be our best selves, to be ourselves, but to be our best selves.
Also, I would encourage young women not to be pulled into what some accused. Pastor Stewart and I were accused, and you may know it, Pastor, already, or you may not have. We were accused of having arrived and didn't help them get to where they wanted or needed to be.
Yep.
But they said that because they were trying to organize these alliances of female pastors or preachers, I should say, so that we could bump against the male alliance that was already in place for hundreds of years, or however long they've been there. But I was never interested in becoming they wanted me to, maybe Pastor Stewart too, to kind of head up something like that. And I would always say, no, I never wanted to alienate myself from the men, period. That was totally not necessary. I don't ever want an all female anything. We need these brothers. We need them. And it's been stated over and over again. So don't let somebody pull you into something like that. I'm not saying some of these programs, I'm not saying that, but to have just an organization to attempt to show the men that we can do this too is not necessary. Another thing I would advise, not only young people, but the older women too, when somebody asks you, whatever title you use, I don't, whatever the Lord gave you, evangelist, prophet, missionary, teacher, preacher, Baptist, bishop, whatever it is, somebody asks you your name, don't say, my name is Evangelist. So that is not your name. You were not born with a title. Your mama named you Barbara. That's your name. And then, then you can tell them what you do. But, don't just, every time, it disturbs me because I was out somewhere and I saw somebody that I thought was, that I knew by face. And I asked her name. The person with her said, oh, this is Pastor Dr. Bishop so-and-so. I said, okay then, but what's your name? I was sincere about it. I still wanted to know her name. I was not being facetious. The woman then answered the first time, her name is Pastor Dr. Bishop. I thought, okay then, well, bless you. And I just went on because I knew that was not going to take. It makes us look foolish. It's not necessary. Men do it too, but young folk don't need to do that kind of stuff. Just tell them your name. And then every time that young women, if the Lord is calling you to preach, you're not automatically an evangelist. Do know that. We need to know what an evangelist is. Men can be evangelists, but see, that's the title that was initially given to all female when they acknowledged the call. But that's evangelist. Don't call me that. Don't call me that. No, just call me my name if you don't know anything else. But and then don't get indignant if somebody called. Well, no, I'm not gonna say that because I have gotten indignant about Sister Mo. No, we have to fix that. So I'm not gonna say that. All right, that's enough on that.
I don't know why in the world I thought this was gonna take 10 to 15 minutes because we can go another 2 hours. We can go another 2 hours, but I do want to respect you all's time. We have been here for the time that we were assigned. Do you all have any final remarks or any final sayings that you would like to give to us as we prepare to go into service and hear these good preachers that we have lined up for this evening?
I would just say, fulfill your ministry. When I accepted my call to ministry, I had no agenda other than saying yes to God. My pastor had already suspected that there were some gifts and calling on my life as related to the ministry, but all I was really trying to do was get God off my back because for over a year, I dealt with this lingering persistence about just answering God, answering this call to ministry. And from the very outset, I had no idea that I would end up pastoring. I had no idea what kind of turn my life would take or anything. It begins, as Reverend Tracy Blackman says, with a yes. But it's a yes that you have to keep committing to every day you get up. It's not a one-time yes. It's a yes that you have to say over and over again. And that yes is sometimes in, difficult places, in painful places, in hurtful places, in hard places. But it's a yes that you have to keep saying over and over again. And I would say, do whatever you do as unto the Lord, because to the faithful, God is always faithful. And God always has a place for prepared people. I would say stay away from competition and comparison. Dr. Jeremiah Wright said once that comparison is like quicksand. And in this day of social media, in this day where everybody can be a wonder, because as long as they have a camera and a ring light, it can be very easy to become discouraged or feel like you're not moving as fast as you think you ought to be moving. But do what you do. Do whatever you do it as unto the Lord. And as I say to my ministers all the time, God is one of the best public relation agents that you could ever find, because your gift will make room for you.
Amen. And I would like to say that, and it is still in conjunction with what Pastor Stewart is saying, we don't have to attempt to make our light shine. The Bible said, let it shine. You don't have to try to make it shine. Just be who you are and who the Lord has called you to be. And I'll close with this little story, which is a truth. One of my assistant pastor, when I was elected, died not long after. I mean, they were dying there. And he was not an old person, but he died before he could serve good. And his funeral was in Mississippi. His family, that's where his church home was. I called the pastor to let him know that the family had asked me to do the eulogy. He said, So I knew right away what that was going to be like. So I just accepted his And when I got there, on time, had my church van with food loaded and all kinds of stuff to go. We got there before time, and he was already taking the family in. They were processionaling prior to the time that we were to be there. He wanted to make sure he did that thing. And I went on to a little side room and robed up, came out, and sat over to the side close to the pulpit, just close enough that he would know I was there. He never acknowledged my presence. He never said a word. And there were male preachers coming in, and he was bring some chairs up here so we can let these brothers sit on up here in the pulpit. And that went on, and I sat quietly. And when the time came for me to deliver the eulogy, I had to get up, go up the choir stand steps, around behind the pulpit, go across the choir, back down on the other side, and stand at this side podium. And it was not directly on the floor, but it was not in the center of the pulpit. So I stood over to the side, and I eulogized the gentleman, and the Lord knows the folk just started shouting in the funeral. And when it was over, he still never said anything. I went out the door, and on the outside, he slid up to me. You didn't have to stand over there and preach. You could have come up to the pulpit. I said, but you never invited me. And I said it with a smile. But in the meantime, listen, his congregants were saying, we're going to declare that pulpit vacant. They were so upset with him. They were extremely upset. I just kept my composure, and I just, we just need to know the Lord. Stand still. Wow. Don't try to make your light shine. Your gift, as Pastor Stewart closed out, will make room for you. I didn't have to say a word to the man, and it was his folks shouting, not mine. So, we got in our van, and this is one thing that was not good. My folk took the food back to Memphis. Didn't know it. No, we didn't leave nothing. They were so upset about it, but I really was not. I was not. I was prepared when he said, the Lord prepared me there. So just be who you are. You don't have to worry about what people do, how they act. I guess, I don't know if they declared the pulpit vacant or not, but his members were quite upset.
Wow. Thank you both for this time. I'm so full right now. And I'm gonna keep the unedited version just for my keepsake, because this has been so awesome. I have enjoyed this time, and thank you all for allowing me to ask you questions and pick your brains. And I will continue to study you all and watch what you all do and take notes and learn. I love y'all, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the both of you, for both of the roles that you play in my life personally. I thank you, and I truly, truly appreciate it. So thank you. And that concludes this interview. And
But let me just say that we appreciate you.
Yes.
We appreciate the way you honor us, the way you respect us. We appreciate your commitment to being equipped as a preacher and a minister, and the life that you live and the example that you set. You are a light, and so you are. Paul said the seal of our apostleship. So we look at people like you. I think about people like you and Stacy and some of those, because when I was coming along, there were a lot of young people that went into ministry. Young preachers were very, very common. You know, it was not unusual to see preachers preaching in their 20s and at 19. You don't see a lot of young people going into ministry like they did back then. And certainly, you know, it was a challenge back then, but I know it's even more there's even greater temptation now. So we appreciate you and appreciate the work that you do. And we see you. We may not always say it, but we see you.
We see you and hear you. You got a word.
Yeah.
And the other young preachers are watching you too.
Wow.
They are. Do know that. They are. They've got their eyes on you. And they're wanting to be like Reverend Kenya Gray.
Wow. Yes, ma'am.
You just need to know that. Thank you, Pastor, for helping her to understand.
Thank y'all. I'm gonna probably cry in my room when I get done. I appreciate those words.
We want to see the ugly cry. Come on.
No. I'll say I love y'all, and
we love you too.
We love you. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Jesus, oh Lord, for all you've done for me. Gave your life on Calvary. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Thank you for all.